Hello everyone, welcome back to the Growth Chronicles. On this channel, we tell stories that remind you what you're capable of, even when everything is against you. Today's story begins with just 11 minutes, and a sentence that could have ended everything. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Omar knew because he watched the clock on the wall the entire time, the way you stare at something ordinary when everything else in the room is too painful to look at. 11 minutes to tell a man that the business he had spent 3 years building was being dropped by its only major investor. 11 minutes to hand back a dream and say, politely, that they didn't believe it had a future. The investor, a man in an expensive gray suit who had never once visited the actual workspace, slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a termination of funding agreement. Clean, prepared, already signed on his end, as if the outcome had been decided long before Omar walked through the door. He said, with the practiced sympathy of someone who does this regularly, that the market had shifted, that the timing wasn't right, that perhaps in a few years, with a different approach, there might be something worth revisiting. Then he said the thing that Omar would carry with him for the rest of his life. He said, "I give it 6 months before you shut it down. Not as a warning, not even as cruelty, just as a fact." The casual, offhand certainty of a man who had watched enough small ventures die that he had stopped seeing them as anything other than statistics. 6 months. He said it the way you say the weather is going to turn, inevitable and indifferent. Omar picked up the paper. He folded it once. He put it in his jacket pocket. He shook the man's hand, because his mother had raised him with manners even when the world didn't deserve them. And then he walked out into the afternoon light and stood on the pavement and did not move for a very long time. He was 31 years old. He had poured every cent of his savings into this company, a small logistics software firm that helped independent delivery drivers manage routes more efficiently. It was not glamorous. It was not the kind of startup that got written up in technology magazines. But it was his, completely and entirely his. I built from an idea he had scribbled on a paper napkin after watching his uncle, a delivery driver for 20 years, lose half a day's earnings because his routing app failed during a peak shift. Omar had seen a problem. He had built a solution. He had believed, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has never been given anything easily, that belief and work would be enough. Apparently they were not. He went home to a one-bedroom apartment that he had been subletting a corner of to a friend just to cover rent. He sat at his kitchen table. He opened his laptop. He looked at the numbers, the real numbers, not the ones he had shown the investor, but the actual state of his accounts. And he understood with complete clarity that he had approximately 6 months of runway left before he would be forced to close. The investor had not been wrong about the timeline. He had just been wrong about what would happen at the end of it. Omar took out the folded paper from his pocket and smoothed it flat on the table. He read it once. Then he turned it over to the blank side, picked up a pen, and wrote 6 words across the top. 6 months to prove him wrong. He did not sleep much that night. Not because he was panicking, though the fear was there, real and cold at the edges of everything, but because his mind would not stop moving. He thought about every conversation he had avoided having, every uncomfortable truth about his business that he had been too busy or too hopeful to confront. He thought about the customers he had. Small, loyal, mostly individual drivers who paid a modest monthly subscription and sent him messages sometimes to say that his software had saved them 2 hours on a Tuesday. He thought about what they actually needed that he hadn't yet built. He thought about what he had been doing wrong and what he had been doing right, and which of those 2 things he had been spending more time on. By 4 in the morning, he had 3 pages of notes and a plan that frightened him with how simple it was. He had been trying to scale up, chasing big contracts, pitching to fleet managers and logistics corporations, trying to become something large and impressive. He had been ignoring the people who already loved what he had built, the small operators who had found him through word of mouth and stayed because the product genuinely worked. He had been so focused on the door that hadn't opened that he had stopped paying attention to the one that already had. He spent the first month doing something that felt almost embarrassingly basic. He called every single one of his existing customers. Not emailed. Called. He asked them what they liked, what frustrated them, what they wished the software could do that it currently couldn't. He listened without interrupting and took notes on everything. Some of those calls lasted 5 minutes. Some lasted over an hour. One customer, a woman named Patricia who ran a small independent courier operation with 4 drivers, talked to him for 90 minutes, and by the end of it, had described almost exactly the feature set that his software was missing. He built those features in month 2. Alone, working 16-hour days, surviving on coffee and the kind of focused energy that only comes when your back is completely against the wall. He released the updates quietly. No announcement, no marketing campaign. He just sent a personal message to every customer saying he had been listening and here was what he had built because of it. The response was unlike anything he had experienced before. Not viral, not explosive. Just real. People wrote back. They shared the update with other drivers in their networks. Patricia sent 3 new customers his way within a week, people she had personally told about the changes. The subscription numbers began to move. Slowly at first, then with a steadiness that felt different from the unstable optimism of his early growth. Because this time it was built on something solid, on people who had been heard and had come back because of it. Month 3 was the hardest. The money was still terrifyingly thin. He had a week in the middle of that month where he could not pay himself at all, where he ate meals that cost less than $1 and walked instead of taking transit and did not tell a single person how close to the edge he was standing. He thought about the investor's voice. 6 months. He thought about it and used it the way a long-distance runner uses the burn in their legs, not as a reason to stop, but as proof that the effort was real. In month 4, a small regional delivery company found him through one of his independent driver customers and reached out about a team subscription for 15 drivers. It was not a huge contract. It was enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to extend his runway. Enough to sit at his kitchen table on the night the payment came through and put his face in his hands and allow himself, for exactly 2 minutes, to feel everything he had been holding back for months. Then he opened his laptop and kept going. Month 5 brought 2 more small companies. Month 6 brought 4. Not because he had changed his pitch or hired a sales team or found a new investor. Because the product worked, and the people who used it told other people. And the word of a delivery driver who has found something that genuinely makes their day easier turns out to be worth more than any marketing budget Omar could have afforded anyway. On the last day of the 6th month, Omar sat at the same kitchen table where he had read the termination agreement. The company was not large. It was not famous, but it was alive, genuinely, sustainably, stubbornly alive. The subscriber count had grown by 240% since the day of that 11-minute meeting. He had not shut it down. He had not come close to shutting it down, not in the end. Not once the fear had been converted into fuel. He took out the folded paper, still in his desk drawer, still with his 6 words written on the back, and looked at it for a long time. He thought about the man in the gray suit, who had not been malicious, who had simply been looking at numbers and probabilities and making a reasonable prediction. He thought about how a reasonable prediction and a determined person are 2 things that don't always end up agreeing with each other. He did not feel anger. He had thought he would when he imagined reaching this point. But what he actually felt was something quieter and more durable than anger. It was the particular satisfaction of someone who was told exactly what they were worth by someone who didn't know them, and then went home and decided to find out for themselves. They had given him 6 months to fail. He had given himself 6 months to rise. Only one of those timelines turned out to be right.